This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 83rd edition of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. Today as my special guest, I have Greg Lewis. Greg is, of course, a Husky running back legend, former NFL player. He's been a coma broadcaster for the Husky. Greg is now the YMCA director. Greg, can I give you a little sports and stuff trivia for a second?
Absolutely. Let's see what I'm made of.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't really involve you. Well, I guess it does kind of involve you. So this is my 83rd show, and I have now had two guests on a third time. And those two guests are yourself and Steve Kelly, the former Seattle Times sports columnist. And here's your connection, Greg, to Steve Kelly that you may very well be aware of. Back in 1987, when you made that big decision to attend the UW over Stanford, Steve wrote a column about your decision to go to the UW. And I was a sophomore at Roosevelt then. You were a senior at Ingram. Do you remember Steve writing that column?
Oh, yeah. I think I still have a copy of that article in one of my scrapbooks at my mom's house. It was definitely a big decision, but at the time, it was a little easier than it would be nowadays because Stanford football wasn't playing so well. So I always grew up wanting to be a Husky, and my mom put a little pressure on me to go to Stanford, but in the end, we were able to convince her to allow me to go to the University of Washington. The rest, as they say, is history. But, yeah, I definitely remember the article that Steve wrote. He interviewed me at Ingram High School. So it was a fun opportunity for him to come out to my school and get a little notoriety at the same time.
Well, I just thought of that. Just a little fun little factoid that 33 years later on Sports and Stuff, you and Steve Kelly are the two guests who have appeared for a third time now, which is really cool. Well, Greg, I appreciate you doing another interview with me today.
I couldn't really hear your question at the end.
No problems, Greg. I appreciate you doing another interview with me today.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm interested if, you guys are still interested in hearing from me. This being my third time, I hope the folks aren't tired of hearing from me. But no, I feel honored to be able to come on your show. And we always have some really good topics to talk about, so I'm excited to dig into it.
No doubt about it. Hey, did you watch that debate last night? What's the Greg Lewis take on it?
Oh, man. Someone did a meme and kind of, I think, explained it how I would agree. It looked like the two old gentlemen from the balcony on the Muppet Show decided to finally get some limelight. And that was probably about what I saw, two cranky old men arguing with each other and, hurling insults and never really getting down into the topics of what could really help this country, sort of recover from all the things that are going on right now. So what I took away is there wasn't a lot of substance to that debate. There was just a lot of, name calling and anger and almost spitefulness. So I think that nobody won, obviously, in my opinion. And I think we deserve better as a country.
Greg, I'm laughing because your analogy of the two old judges from the Muppet Show, those are two characters. Yeah. I actually laugh with a bunch of my buddies about those guys, Greg. So I will include you in the sense of humor about those two old judges from the Muppet Show. Here was my take on that debate last night. I think Biden may have nominally won the debate. Or I guess the Democrats and his campaign did. I think Biden's performance is kind of analogous to a pitcher who got a no decision. Is that a bad way of breaking it down?
I can definitely see that. I think for me, what I was hoping is that somebody would have come out of that debate having said something substantive that we could take and say, okay, here's a platform that we can build on as a nation to help us sort of escape from all of the things that are going on right now, from, the coronavirus crisis, all the things that are going on, the protests and demonstrations, the lack of justice that seems to rear its ugly head every so often in this country, and just some leadership. And I just didn't hear enough of that from anybody for me to feel like the debate was a winner on either side. And no decision, I guess, could be, a way to look at it. I would say a no decision in an extra inning game that ended in a tie because of a sloppy, nasty, ugly rain delay.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Well, you know where my sentiments are. I'm not a big Donald Trump fan, you know that. But so, Greg, what's new these days? You had a long run at Como. What's going on with that?
Well, I've had the honor to serve as the Husky pregame analyst for Como Radio for the last 6 years or so, and last year I had an opportunity to actually start doing some of the color commentary for the Husky program, and which I really enjoyed. Unfortunately, Como lost the bid for Husky radio broadcast this year to KJR. And so KJR is building out their own programming with some of their own on-air personalities. So it looks like, at least for this year, I won't be doing a lot of Husky stuff. There's a small chance that, again, I could do some color commentary for a game here or there if Damon Heward, who was going to retire but decided to come back for one more year. If he does have any conflicts, I could potentially be called in to do that again. But looks like for this year, at least, I'll be one of the Huskies' biggest fans.
Greg, I just hope we can figure out some way to keep you as part of the Husky football broadcasting team, one way or another. Those are my sentiments.
Well, I appreciate that. I certainly do enjoy it, love it. It keeps me connected to the program in more than just the fan mode, which I like doing. And my Saturdays have gotten used to, doing a lot of pregame and postgame and prep work and getting to know the players and the coaches and stuff. So I definitely hope to be back sometime soon.
Well, we all enjoy your commentaries, Greg. You've got a few texts from me over the years when you've done those radio commentaries. So I hope you can continue doing it. So, Greg, this feels like a generation ago. You were last on my show back in August of 2019. I mean, it's just like, BC and AD. It's like pre-pandemic, PP, post-pandemic, whatever you want to call it. It's just crazy when you think about how the world's changed. And I remember we talked about UW football for the 2019 season, and you predicted they'd be like at least a Rose Bowl type team, and they didn't have that great of a year. But I want to ask you about Chris Peterson. And he announced at the end of the 2019 season that he was stepping down. And I want, Greg, you played at the UW, you've been a commentator, you worked at the university, you know that program so well. How do you evaluate Chris's 6 years at the UW? Will he be a Husky Hall of Fame member one day? Will he be a National College Football Hall of Fame member? Just give me your takes on those questions, but give a little evaluation of Chris Peterson's 6 years at Washington.
Sure. And let me just say, I did predict that the Huskies would be a Rose Bowl caliber team last year. And keep in mind, the loss against Oregon and Cal and Utah all very easily could have been Husky wins. They were leading most of those games into the fourth quarter and had some defensive breakdowns near the end of the game that cost them. So they very well still could have been in the running if it weren't for just a few plays here or there.
Sure.
Coach Peterson, I think, you do have to just thank him for what he did for Husky football. Husky football had really, taken a slow slide that turned into an avalanche at some point under Coach Willingham. And then gradually Sarkisian helped put the pieces back together. But Chris Peterson actually made the Huskies cool again. And culminating in his, I believe, third season that the Huskies were playing in the national playoff in 2016 in the Final Four of football, as they call it. And, jumped out to an early lead against overwhelming favorite in Alabama. So I think looking at it from that perspective, you have to think that he did a great job, and Husky Nation owes him a great, great deal of gratitude for just making Husky football cool again. He hired some great coaches, and now I think having the opportunity to have Coach Jimmy Lake take over as head coach, again, is some part of his legacy that he left behind. And hopefully the program is in really good, steady hands, and Jimmy Lake will be able to, with his energy and enthusiasm and love for the program, take it to that at least the same level where Peterson had it humming at for a while. He also won two Pac-12 championships, regular season and the Pac-10 12 championship game. So again, a lot of good stuff that Chris Peterson did for the program. He also elevated recruiting. I think our recruiting rankings over the last several years have been some of the highest that it's ever been as a program, making, especially on the West Coast regionally, the Husky program as a destination for some of the top players in this side of the Mississippi River. And, even dipping into Texas, I know it's still west of the Mississippi, but dipping into the fertile recruiting grounds of Texas here and there, and getting some big-time players out of Utah and, of course, California, and sort of returning some of the panache to, if you're a great player from Washington, you don't have to go out of state. A lot of our kids escaped to Notre Dame and Stanford and some of those other places for years, and he made it cool for those guys to stay home again. So, having said all those things, I would give him a grade of A in what he did. I would say, I wish it would have been a couple years longer, maybe 2-3 more years.
Sure.
Here would have cemented him as a Husky all-time great Hall of Famer. And I'm not saying that he isn't, but I think that would have left no doubt whatsoever. But when you look at him from his career, he's absolutely a college football Hall of Famer. I think his winning percentage is still in the top 5 all time.
Wow.
For major college coaches. I think when he came here, he was like 96-12 all time, something crazy like that. And so he's been successful at 2 big-time programs, and one he turned into a big-time program. And to have success at Washington again, get them back to conference championships, getting them into the Final Four, and making them a premium destination for West Coast football, I think, he's definitely in consideration for a Husky Hall of Fame. And the only reason that might be questioned a little bit is just that his tenure wasn't extremely long.
Was just 6 years. Greg, I have a friend who is a big Husky Nation guy, big Husky, and he actually said to me several months ago, he thought the irony of Chris Peterson is he may have a better shot at getting in the College National Football Hall of Fame than the Pac-12. I'm sorry, there's a College Football Hall of Fame. There's also, I believe, the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame, and then there's the UW Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, this gentleman thought that the irony of Chris Peterson is he may have a better shot getting in the College National Football Hall of Fame than the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame and the UW Hall of Fames. Do you buy that at all?
Yeah, just because of, like I said, the shortness of his tenure.
Right.
I believe he only played in one Rose Bowl during his time, and so one time at the bowl game may not be enough to get you in. At least I know while he was here at Washington, there was only one appearance. And then for the UW Hall of Fame, if time and tenure is a part of the process in which someone is voted or graded, then that might work against him. We have had some coaches, who have had many, many more years in the tower, as we used to call it, with Don James as Husky coach. So from those standpoints, I could definitely see that might be a scenario. But he's definitely, in my opinion, a College Football Hall of Fame coach. What he did at Boise State, a school that was not on the map for football, really until he elevated them with some big wins and some big bowl games and, some great seasons. And then coming to Washington and validating what he did there by getting to the Final Four with a Husky team that had fallen, kind of into some mediocrity, says a lot about who he is as a coach. And then just this last year, I think it was announced that the University of Washington had the highest academic index in the entire Division I football throughout the country, in the Power 5 at least. And so not only did he win, but he won the right way, and his kids graduated. And even those who aren't in the NFL, and there are a lot of them who are, hopefully they're still having success in their lives because of their experience here in Washington and getting their college degrees. So I think when you look at it all together, he deserves to be in anybody's Hall of Fame.
Great coach. I hope he makes them all. Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with Greg Lewis, Husky legend. Greg, you mentioned Jimmy Lake a minute ago. Are you 100% supportive of the decision of the University of Washington to hire Jimmy Lake as the college football coach?
Well, I absolutely know that Jimmy Lake has been a hot commodity across the country as both a defensive coordinator and a head coach. And so this opportunity was coming for him somewhere soon. And with as many people being, bullish about him, you have to think that he's definitely a qualified candidate. He's somebody that a lot of people believe can help their program and get the job done. And what better transition for us if we're going to lose Coach Peterson, to have someone who's already on the staff, who the kids already know, who had a lot of success with the defense over the last several years and keeping some continuity. And he was also able to salvage the recruiting class that had been put together, which was one of the best that the Huskies had in a long time. I have no doubt that Jimmy has what it takes to be a good college head football coach. He has the passion, the energy. He has the knowledge. He's been a part of this program. He's well respected in the Northwest, so recruiting should go well. And he's going to be a good head coach. It may take a year or two just to get his system in place and, learn all the nuances, the things that are different from being a coordinator. But, I'm obviously fully supportive of him at the University of Washington. I think that it was a great decision if we lost Peterson to retain him. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the Jimmy Lake era looks like.
I am too. I'm definitely rooting for Coach Lake. By the way, Greg, a little backup. Chris Peterson was a coach for 6 years at the University of Washington. Hey, that's a full U.S. Senate term, if you look at it from that standpoint.
Good point. You can accomplish a lot in 6 years, and I really think he did. And I think the program is light years ahead of where it is when he left it than where it was when he came in.
I just thought of that a second ago. I mean, six years can like you just said, a lot can happen in 6 years. So, Greg, I want to get your take on this. You have a unique perspective as a broadcaster, former player, and so forth. So the the Pac-12 is going to be doing, it looks like, a 7-game schedule beginning in early November. Every Pac-12 team will play 5 games in its own division, plus a divisional crossover game prior to the December Conference Championship. And I believe the teams that don't qualify for the title game will play an additional conference game against a squad from the opposite division. So a 7-game season. Greg, do you like this format is my first question. My second question is, should the Pac-12 be even be playing football during this deadly pandemic?
Ooh. Okay, the second part of that's a loaded question, and so I'll take that on second. Okay. Any football for a football fan, I think is a good plan. You're dealing with circumstances you've never dealt before. You're put in a position that you have not been in. Time and all those things are issues. So I think they're trying to come up with a plan that gives them the best opportunity to play a schedule, to give kids an opportunity to showcase themselves who might have a chance at the NFL, and to build some school spirit and camaraderie and all of those things, and at the same time try to keep your players safe. So I think just as a football fan, you have to be, excited about whatever you're going to get at this point. We're starting behind a lot of the other conferences, so they may have something that looks more normal than we do, but I think that is something that, as a football fan, you have to be excited about. The second part, now, I don't want anyone to think that I'm being political as I say this, because this is really something, a thought that I come to even more recently, but with the pandemic at hand, I think this has kind of forced my thinking along these lines. College football, as I looked at it a little more closely, is, set up to really, I don't know, as an African-American former student athlete, thinking about the way college football is ran and how it truly benefits certain people, I would have to take a second look at whether or not I would be playing right now. If you think about it,
sure.
College football and basketball are majority African-American student athletes. They just are.
Right.
I'm sure football is 65% more and basketball is probably, high 70s, 80s, And so, yeah, a lot of kids are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, neighborhoods who, and not every kid that plays college football and basketball do, but a lot of them do. Let's just say a lot of them do. They're playing, they're not being paid, they're not receiving any compensation. You can say a college degree or ability to go to college, and that's great. And nowadays, most of them are getting their degree, but, you go back 20 years, you probably wouldn't say most, you'd say a lot, but not most. So here's a system where, frankly, the overwhelming majority of the coaches are Caucasian men. They just are. And so they're all becoming millionaires off of this system. Most of the administrators, college administrators, athletic departments are Caucasian men, so they're all becoming rich. And if you take football and basketball, which are the only revenue-producing sports out of athletic departments, the majority of the athletic departments are tennis and golf and swimming and soccer and sports that, frankly, a lot of kids who are playing those sports come from privileged backgrounds. And they're not making any revenue. So college football and basketball are being forced to play these kids and endangering their health, potentially contracting COVID. So a bunch of people who don't look like them can become millionaires, and other kids can get scholarships who come from privileged backgrounds. To me, that's a weird system, and I would really have to think about whether or not I'm going to be used in that manner. Because athletic departments will fail without football and basketball. But again, most of those athletes are black, they're unpaid, and they're pawns in a system that is making a lot of other people either rich or privileged. So I think that's something as an African-American student athlete I would really have to think about.
You sound kind of ambivalent, Greg, about whether the Pac-12 should be playing football this fall. Am I kind of extrapolating what you're saying correctly?
No, I think what I'm saying is I know why the Pac-12 wants to play football, but if I was those student athletes, I would be really reticent about risking my health, not knowing any long-term effects for a system that's, benefiting a lot of other people other than me.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying.
And we've talked about the college pay issue before. We could get really deep into that issue, but
yeah,
these are tough questions. And I hear what you're saying. You got school spirit considerations. You have players that want to perform, maybe get some NFL exposure. There's so many facets to this issue. By the way, Greg,
exactly.
You knew Don James. You played for him. You played for the late legendary coach, and you've had a couple of great stories about your Don James years and your interactions with Coach James. Where do you think Don James would be on whether the Huskies should play during this coronavirus pandemic? I know we'll never know the answer, but give it a shot.
Right. I think he's a football coach, and that's what he loved to do. But you saw when it came to the whole 2 years probation, the backdoor deal that was made with the Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time between the UW president and athletic director and the conference, that he was adamantly against that. He took a stand and stepped down when he certainly could have coached, somewhere from 3 to 5 more years. So I tend to think that he would look at this objectively. He would sort of decide where he stood on it, which, he's definitely going to look at the players' best interest, not just the department. And I can't really come down and say what side he would have landed on.
Sure.
But I think if he felt like it wasn't the right thing to do, then he wouldn't have been, passive about it. He would have definitely been vocal. He would have made some sort of stand in one way, shape, or form, and he would have applied pressure or did what he felt like he needed to do in order to lead his program in the right direction, whether that was playing or not playing. Because like you mentioned, some of these kids are looking for an opportunity to perform for NFL, have a chance to go pro, take care of their families and all of those things. And that's a real consideration. But again, the health and the long-term impact and effects that this potentially could have on some of the student athletes is a concern. So I would have to think that he would weigh all those things, and then he would definitely be a vocal leader and, even past vocal, if that's what it took, on what happened in this conference.
Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with the great football player and broadcaster Greg Lewis. What a fascinating answer, Greg. and looking back at where Don James would be today on this whole coronavirus pandemic. Those questions: where would Lincoln be today? Where would Martin Luther King be today? There's some interesting football questions. Where would Don James be today? So I think you gave a really interesting answer. Greg, speaking of college football players that want to play in the NFL, most of them do. Do you think this 7-game Pac-12 season is going to affect scouting in different ways? Isn't it harder for the NFL to evaluate players with only a 7-game season?
Maybe. I think, when scouts are watching film on players, they probably get a pretty early sense on whether or not this individual on film is what they're looking for. They're still going to do the combines or have some sort of way, of testing players, whether they do a combine or not, to get the speed numbers and the strength numbers and all of that. But, players on film usually give you a pretty good indication of who they are in a relatively small sample size. I didn't, there in my 24 games of starting, I probably didn't look a whole lot different in any of those games as far as what skills I possess, my ability to make a guy miss, my ability to break a tackle, my ability to pass protect, to, read a defensive coverage. Those things come out, relatively easily in a decent sample size. So I don't think you need, 12 games, in order for someone to see what a player's abilities are. You can discern that in 7 games, definitely. So I think them not being able to be there in person could have an impact to some degree. But the scouts do use a lot of film study to dissect whether or not that player possesses the abilities that they need in their program. And I definitely believe 7 games is more than enough time to do that.
More than enough. Interesting. But Greg, there's the occasional athlete that's been called a gamer. The man or woman that just, maybe not the greatest practice players, but they just seem to go crazy when they play games. There is the occasional player like that, though, right?
Oh, of course. And I'm talking game film. If you play 7 games and you only play well in one of them, I wouldn't call you a gamer. I would say you got one good game. If you're a gamer, it's going to show up on that film over a span of 7 games. So I think that is enough game film for them to be able to evaluate whether or not you're what they're looking for.
Good feedback. Greg, got time for a couple more questions. Paul Schneiderman, again, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with Greg Lewis. Greg, there's been some talk, and I've heard some of the KGR 950 guys talk about this lately, about what's going to happen, the future of the Pac-12. And I want to know where Greg Lewis is on this. Do you think the Pac-12 should expand? Should it stay the same? Would you support the idea of Washington leaving with, say, Oregon and USC and UCLA to another conference? And how do you feel about the idea of Washington State possibly not being in the same athletic conference? I know I'm asking you a whole bunch of questions there, but give me your take on the future of the Pac-12.
Sure. I'm hopeful that the Pac-12 will remain a strong conference that can sustain being part of the Power Five and elevate its status in areas that relate to success on the field, whether that's recruiting, notoriety, viewership, so that the pundits can see them play, all those kinds of things. That's the hope, that would be the best case scenario. But you can say that right now the Pac-12 has taken a hit in a lot of ways. Our television contracts have been, very unfavorable. So revenues are down in the Pac-12 as opposed to some of the other conferences. Our viewership is down, especially by East Coast media, and all that stuff does make a difference when you start thinking about rankings and all of that. Now, you can go out on the field and win every game, and then it doesn't really matter. But the reality is if I'm in the Southeastern Conference or the Big 12, I can lose a game, and still be, considered, or maybe even 2. But the Pac-12 doesn't seem to have that luxury at this point. And recruiting is the lifeblood, as they always say. Yeah, it's sort of about the X's and O's, but it's really about the Jimmies and Joes. So the
Hadn't heard that one,
to,
Greg.
yeah, the ability to impress 16, 17, 18-year-old kids is what sustains your program. And if they're not looking at the Pac-12, and there's evidence of a lot of the guys from California who've been a big recruiting ground. We've seen kids right now. Washington has three of the top 10 football players in the country in the state of Washington, 2 in the top 5, and both of them are strongly considering going out of state right now. And that's, a big blow. And not just out of state, they're considering going out of the Pac-12 footprint. And so that says something about where we might be as a conference. Although those things do happen, it just seems to be too regular. So having said all of that, if the Pac-12 ended up not being the best place to sustain excellent football at the University of Washington because of, bowl alliances, rankings, recruiting, and all of that, and the health of the program depended on moving to another conference, maybe creating a super conference with the Big 10 or Big 12 or something like that, whatever is going to benefit our program, I would be for that in a sense of it making sense. So all things are sort of changing and transforming. College athletics has transformed and changed. I mean, you remember the old Southwestern Athletic Conference? That's gone. That used to have Texas was in the Southwestern Athletic Conference. That conference no longer exists. So things do change. And if it had to change in order for our program to stay strong and healthy, then, it is what it is. And we would have to explore all opportunities to make sure the University of Washington stay a strong, financially viable, nationally competitive football program.
Would you feel bad, though, Greg, if we were no longer in the same conference with Washington State University?
I wouldn't necessarily feel bad for not being in a conference with them. I feel bad that the Pac-10/12/8, all the names that has been, if it no longer existed, I would feel bad about that. But I have seen other instances where teams who are in different conferences, because they're geographically connected, still play each and every year. So if we could have a scenario where the University of Washington and Washington State, although in different conferences, still had an annual game that they played every year, then I think that, would suffice for me. There's no joy every year in saying we won the Pac-12 and Washington State came in 12th, which is, more likely than not in a lot of scenarios and cases. So, yeah, I did just take a shot at Washington State University. I don't get a lot of joy out of saying that, but just the fact that we beat them is something that I think is more important to Husky fans and would be important to Cougar fans if they ever beat us.
Well, let's see what happens. I personally would like to see Washington State stay in the same conference. We'll have to see what happens. Well, Greg, this might be my last question. And you've done broadcasting for many years. You know how sometimes you kind of get on a high horse where you keep asking the same question because you're so fascinated by the answers that you get? So I've asked this question to all sorts of guests. I'm going to ask it to you. Dave Grosby answered Floyd Merriweather. Dave Sims answered Sandy Koufax. Steve Rabel said Bill Russell. A whole bunch of other guests have answered with different names of athletes. Greg, if you could interview or have an extended conversation with one living sports figure, who would it be?
So if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said Muhammad Ali. And the reason that I'm going to choose a different athlete is the same reason why I probably would have chose Muhammad Ali back then, because back then he was an athlete, but he also used his platform and power as an athlete to talk about social issues and things that were going on in the country, and he wasn't afraid to say them, even though there would be direct injury to himself, maybe even his, family. And he got a lot of flack. People loved Muhammad Ali in the last 25 years of his life, but people forget about how many people hated him in the, first 30 years of his life.
Oh, he was controversial, no doubt.
Yes. So today I would pick LeBron James because I think he's doing that same thing. He's using his power. He's using his voice, not only just in social issues, but he's kind of changed the paradigm even in professional basketball, where now the players have wrested some of the power away from the quote unquote NBA organization, and they get choice. And he's been a part of that, with all the stuff he did as part of the decision. I know the broadcast of the decision itself was looked upon negatively, but it really started to turn the tide of basketball players having choice and voice and power and those sorts of things. So I would like to, kind of sit down with him and understand how did he, get to that place where he understood that he was going to be making some of those risks and changes, but for the betterment of all, and what gives him the courage to stand up and say things. Even someone like Michael Jordan was reticent to, make big public stands because it could hurt his brand. Why is he willing to lay it all on the line and, push a narrative because it means so much to him? So I think today he would be the athlete that I would want to talk to.
What a great answer. You're right. LeBron has been very progressive on issues, and he's been outspoken and has had courage. And I will add him to that long list now I'm getting of all these different fascinating living athletes. Softy answered Tiger Woods. I mean, the list goes on. Percy Allen answered Mike Tyson. So no one had said LeBron James yet. So I'm glad to have LeBron's name added to the list. Well, Greg, I really appreciate doing this. We're going to be doing an extended YouTube version and a Rainier Avenue Radio version of this interview. And I look forward to seeing you soon, my friend. And thanks for doing a telephonic interview today on Sports and Stuff.
All right, Paul. Thanks for having me. I always appreciate you.
You too. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Greg.
Bye-bye.